Hey guys, today's video is on should I refinance my property? Let's dive right on in. Okay, so should I refinance my property? I get this question a lot from people that have owned their property for a couple years, maybe a long time, and they're wondering the pros and cons to refinancing my property. So first off, let's understand kind of the differences and the different terms of refinancing. So there's one called a rate and term refinance. So what that's basically doing is just reducing your either like from a 30-year to a 15-year or lowering the interest rate from like a 5% to a 3% interest rate. Okay, so it could be a combination of all those. So what some people do is, as you know, as interest rates drop, therefore your monthly payments would be less. Now, this is advantageous sometimes if it's a big drop from like a 9% to a 3%, but from a 5 to a 3, I actually probably don't suggest just doing a rate and term refinance, and here's why. Is because you're gonna have a lot of lender fees and loan closing costs. You have to get an appraisal, you have to get title to record that lien again and all of that. And what it's basically doing is just restarting your amortization. So let's say in 2017, you bought a property and it's a 5% interest rate, a $90,000 loan. First off, you probably paid around $2,000 to $5,000 in closing costs for that loan. And it's only been on for 3 years. So you divide, let's just call it 3,000 divided by 3. So your average cost per each one of those years was 1,000. Okay, so for those 3 years, your average was there. So the longer you have that loan out, these costs per year decrease over time. So what you're going to want to do is really think about that. It's like, really, I don't suggest refinancing till 5 years, 4 maybe if it's really appreciated. But it's just you have all these initial closing costs that if you refinanced in 1 year, that's a lot for that first year. Okay, so think about that. So think if you're going to then go and refinance in 2020 with that, you'll have to pay all of these fees over again to get this fixed 30-year loan. Okay, so another thing to consider on that is that you have an amortization schedule and you're paying a lot of interest, right? As I've mentioned before. Maybe I should pull up share a screen on that sometime with you guys. But you can just do it, look at an amortization table graph. Those first few years, if your monthly principal and interest payment was 1,000, I would say like 95% of those payments of this in the first few years is interest. So your huge interest payments those first 5 years. So if you're on year 25 or whatever, in this case, year 27 left on it, you're going ahead and restarting this interest all over again. And your lender's wrapping you up. Yeah, sure, it's a lower interest rate, but those first 5 years, you're doing it again. Hence why you kind of see like there's always these refinance booms every 4 to 7 years, is because they know that's when it actually starts getting more and more awesome for you as your principal payments go up over time. Okay, so really understand that amortization table, and that lenders are just trying to skew you into getting, a 1% or, a 2.5% better interest rate. You can pay $50 less a month and all of that. Somewhat I consider if you can wrap it up into a 15-year mortgage, but I have a whole other video on that. I would really rather prefer to have a 30-year mortgage and pay it off like double payments as if it were the payments of a 15-year mortgage, because if you get caught with your pants down in a financial situation and you have to pay a higher payment on the 15-year mortgage, you still have to pay it. But then you can just bump down your payments to a 30-year mortgage and float it for a while, and it lasts you out. So there's nothing wrong with getting a 30, paying it like a 15-year, paying it off in 15 years, just do that math, but you have a little bit extra of a backup in case you need to pay less for 1 year or another. So that'd be my suggestion there. For a rate and term refinance, so I guess really my conclusion is on rate and term refinances, I don't really think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth these extra closing costs 3 to 5 to 7 years later, and that especially that amortization schedule restarting over, with your loan paid off a little bit. Okay, but I do think a cash out refinance is advantageous if you're able to pull out enough cash out. So let's say your property, you bought it for, purchased it for 100 grand, okay? And then, X amount of years later, it's worth 200 grand. Let's do some scenarios here. 150, 300 grand, okay? So what you're gonna be able to do with a cash out refinance, typically you can get out 75% loan to value, okay? So 200K times 0.75, you can pull out, you'd be able to get a loan, 75% loan to value. You'd be able to get out 150K over here on this side. If it's worth 150 times 0.7, I think that's 100, 112, 112.5. If it's worth 300 times 0.75 would be a 225K loan. All right, so you're like, all right, like the more it's worth, the better. So you want to just make sure you have equity, because yet again, when you do this cash out, you're having to pay these lender fees and closing costs and all those mortgage things and title recording fees, mortgage recording fees, all this stuff, 2 to 5 grand. So you might want to think about the time in between, then also how much money you're getting out. Is it worth, so in this scenario, your loan is at 100K, you have 50K, and if it's 200K, you have 50K. Or this one, look, if it's only worth 150 grand more and your loan is 100 grand, whatever your loan amount is, all you can pull out is 12,000, right? Because let's say your loan balance was still 100K. Right? So that's how much extra equity difference you'd be able to pull out. I don't think paying, let's just call it 3 grand in closing costs to get only 12 grand, so AKA 9 grand in net equity pulled out of your property is worth it. Especially if you're going to restart this amortization schedule yet again, as I mentioned. So that's why I think it's worth it if you can pull out 30 grand, 40, 50 grand plus. Is probably at the point where it's worth it to do a cash out refinance because of what you're going to use that money for. So I also think another caveat is just what you're going to invest it in. So I'll just go with plan A. If your plan A is to reinvest into real estate, then yes, because if you pull out that 30K, you could go buy another turnkey property that is appreciating, that's cash flowing and all of that. But I think if you're doing a cash out just to go buy a big, huge boat, I don't suggest that, because you need to wait. I would first invest, buy a rental property that gives you 200 a month, maybe buy 2 or 3 that gives you 500 a month. Then you could use that to pay for the minimum payment on a boat. I have a whole video on that. So my suggestion with the proceeds from this cash out, if it's greater than 30 grand, is to invest that money into stuff that's going to make you more money and appreciate. Then hopefully that property appreciates in 2 to 5 years and appreciates, to this 200 grand, you can pull out 50 again, and you can then have 2 more properties and keep going from there if you see that point of view. So that's my point on the cash out. Just make sure there's enough equity in it, because especially when you start getting to the point of when your property's worth 300 grand and you only have 100 grand loan on it, there's some things you need to consider here. Like, what I think is like, which lender would want to foreclose on you? If the property's worth 150 grand and they have a 100K loan, or if the property's worth 300 grand and you have a 100K loan. If I were a lender, I'd probably foreclose on this guy first, because then I can go, I have lots of equity. But this guy that has barely any equity, especially if your property's only 110 or whatever, I'd probably work with this guy and do a rate and term refinance and something with him if he's behind on payments, just thinking that. So your risk is hedged. The risk is on the lender more when the loan to value is higher. So what I think it is, it's you only want, probably, my opinion of course, 50% equity in your deals, in your properties, to where it's either like, what I would really probably consider is, I either want one all the way 100% paid off, or at 75 to 50% equity, 80 or so, and then just keep leveraging them. Then what I would do is, like, if you have 5 or 10 properties and they all have 60% equity, I would refinance 2 or 3 as high as I could to pay off 2 or 3 others. So that way you have some paid off all the way, and then some that are highly leveraged, because just those highly leveraged ones are at risk to a lender foreclosing on it. You get those kind of points of views there. If your strategy is to own all your properties cash, which mine are someday, I would definitely like snowball, just pay off one loan at a time. Don't pay off all 10 loans at one time equally, pay them all off one at a time. And you can use this cash out refinance as a strategy to achieve that. So anyways, there are my thoughts on that. Should I refinance? I would. If it's a cash out, you're going to invest the money and you're getting at least 30K pulled out of it due to all those lender costs and everything like that. Hopefully that helps you out so much, helps you get going on your investment career. I definitely have personally done this myself. Of course, all this is my opinion. Consult your accountant, your attorney, your CPA, all of that. Guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure to like this video, smash that subscribe button, hit that little bell so you know when I'm putting out more videos. Thank you so much for your support. Bye-bye.